This summer, I did something that I never thought I would do. I, along with my wife Linda, traveled to Germany. Germany was not on my wish list, not on the bucket list. In fact, I have been to Europe many times, and I've always skirted going to Germany. I hear the German language, and I get nervous. I viscerally have always felt what I had learned, and rightly so, that Germany was identified with much pain. I am a child of Holocaust survivors, born less than a decade after my parents' liberation. And their wound, their loss, the murder of family, was part, without it being front and center, was always there as part of who I was. I was very identified with my parents. I had a Yiddish accent to the age of 11. When do we begin? Again, I think it was due to having extraordinarily warm and loving parents with whom I was very identified. I remember once a man coming to our home early on. I was only a child, and he was selling knives, house to house. And he sat down, and I remember I was with my mother. She took out the knife, and she saw engraven on this big cutting knife, it said, "Made in Germany." She gave him back the knife and said, "No, thank you." He said, "But you haven't tried our product." She says, "I have." And so Germany, for me, was not something I had a draw to do. And at the same time, I knew and know that Germany is more than just the Holocaust for Jews. This garment that I'm wearing is called a kittel. It's a Yiddish word for the custom of wearing a white garment with no pockets, a shroud. That's an Ashkenazic custom. The word Ashkenaz means Germany. Indeed, there's such richness of Jewish history and many difficulties, but so much came out of Ashkenaz. Lighting 2 Shabbos candles, a custom from Ashkenaz. Bar and bat mitzvah. I should say bar mitzvah. And bat. But bar mitzvah, 14th century Germany, where it first became customized to do it as a formalized celebration. The great synagogues of Berlin, where Louis Lewandowski composed music in the 19th century that's part of our service yet today. And the words that we utter, the mi yechiyah, mi yamut, who will live and who will die, composed in Mainz, Germany in the 10th century. And so I also knew that Germany was more than the tragedy of World War II, that there was much richness. I have a cousin foster brother who's very, very dear to me, Joe Jankovic, and his wife Kathy. And Kathy is a master organizer. And she said to Linda and to me, "Joe's giving a medical lecture in Berlin, and I'll organize a tour of the Rhine, those important old Jewish cities of spires and Worms and Mainz. We would love to spend the time with you." Well, we loved their company, and it felt like it was time. I was also impressed, and I honor my teacher, Elie, who passed this year, by the fact that he went to Germany through the years. And he said, "We Jews do not believe in collective guilt. It's one of the key teachings of our Torah, that the sins of parents are not to be visited on their children, let alone their grandchildren. And it is more than a generation. Indeed, it is more than 70 years since the end of World War II. It felt like it was time." And so we chose to fly Lufthansa because they had a direct flight from Elie to Frankfurt and then just to skip over to Berlin. We would spend a week in Berlin and be joined by our daughter, Anna, who was in Tel Aviv for the semester. And I figured flying on Lufthansa, I would acclimate. When the pilot said, Achtung, pay attention, I paid a lot of attention. But it was a nice flight. And Berlin is a modern city, a remarkable city, a city in which we have children who are of dear friends living there as expats, because it's a lively city. But it was also, and this is the power of travel, to experience more concretely the past, not as an abstraction, but as a reality. We have another friend with us today, Mitchell Brennan, the Kahal, who joined us for a tour on the first day. And the first day we stood in a place called Bebelplatz, a big square, the center of this town, surrounded by what was Berlin University, now called Humboldt University, as this area was East Germany during that period of time. In May 10th, 1933, this space was a place of book burning. What was fascinating is to learn how young the Nazi movement was. That book burning, I always thought was a mob. But standing in this place and looking at the law school and the opera house was to appreciate that, one, it was in the center of town, but it was the students of the most prestigious university of Germany, Berlin University, who in the course of 4 days went to the library and took 20,000 books that they kept building up and building up. Jewish name, a forbidden book. Why? What is it with the Jews? Here I understood. It's because of what we believe. What we believe is that all people are created in the image of God. That was condemned by the Nazi platform as universalism. And universalism was an undermining of the core ideology of the superiority of the Aryan people. And so those books that preached universalism, not just Jews, but Jews in particular, those were put into the pile. And then, with everything ready, Joseph Goebbels drove up in a limousine. No match had yet been lit. He was only 38 years old. He was only 36 years old. He was in charge of propaganda. Mind you, Hitler was only 43 years old in 1933. And what did he preach? And what was Goebbels, who would give a speech to all those gathered before that match was lit? What was the message? We will reclaim our glory. In World War I, we lost. And in the Versailles Treaty, we paid dearly. But the future is ours. We will reclaim our glory of the past. And those students who had been born and raised after World War I, it was they who felt that this people, this German people, needed to become great again. And it was they who gathered these books, and it was they who lit that match. And standing in that kind of place, that event becomes not an abstraction, but a reality. That words are powerful, and they can lead to good, and they can lead to evil. There is a plaque next to a monument that was commissioned by an Israeli sculptor, Micha Olman. And the memorial to the book burning is a large glass pane, And through it you can see a room lined with bookshelves on all four walls, enough bookshelves to hold 20,000 books, the number that were burned. And there, the plaque alongside it acknowledges the date of that book burning in 1933, and there is a quote of Heinrich Heine in the early 19th century, more than 100 years before that book burning, from one of his plays that said, "This is but prelude. After they burn the books, they will burn people." And so it was. But how did that happen? So another moment, another place, Wannsee. Wannsee is a villa about 40 minutes drive from Berlin. In 1942, in January of 1942, that is where Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the Gestapo, who at the time was 38 years old, gathered the leaders of the Nazi party in control, again, 1942. So there was already a lot of land under their control, and held a 90-minute meeting. The setting of Wannsee is this gorgeous villa surrounded by a garden and, from the conference room, a view overlooking a beautiful lake. That's where these leaders of the Reich met to find and decide on the total solution for the Jewish problem. Adolf Eichmann was the secretary for Reinhard Heydrich. He took notes. And in the formal meeting, they talked about the need to relocate the Jews to Poland, and only spoke in code that the goal was to starve and exterminate. But at the end of the 90 minutes, Adolf Eichmann would later testify that fine cognac was served, although it was a morning meeting, and people spoke bluntly and with laughter of what was yet the mission ahead. To stand there alongside a high school class from Alabama with their tour guide was to know that evil doesn't look necessarily evil. It can look very normal. On the walls are the people who sat around the conference table. Most had graduate degrees. Most were in their 30s, 40s, young, forward-looking, feeling they had a mission to justify evil. Often there's a larger good, often claimed. That too I learned standing there. And from there we went to Grunwald Station. Grunwald Station was the major train station where the Jews were deported from Berlin, starting in 1941. You would receive a letter from both the municipality but also from the Jewish leadership, giving you 3 days to get ready to go to the train station, requiring you to buy your ticket to a place yet unknown with one suitcase. And you can walk up the long ramp where those people walked, waiting to get on those trains from 1941 to 1945, with Auschwitz being the major destination. In 1933, Jews were only, what percentage of Germany would you guess? I showed my hand by saying only. 1%. In Berlin, Jews were 3%, though in that university, the University of Berlin, faculty, close to 30%. Physicians, according to my friend Marilyn Horan, in Berlin in 1933, doctors, what would you guess? 40%. 40%. And that was also part of the problem. The Jews were looking very powerful. The small, only real minority in Germany looked far, far, far more powerful than their numbers. And we were. And you walk up that ramp to the train station, and you knew that as they walked up that ramp, they did not know what was ahead. If they did, they would not have gone up the ramp carrying that piece of luggage. They thought, this is going to blow over. So we'll work. They'll send us to some place to do some work for the nation. Of course, we know what the outcome was. And there, along those tracks, there were 186 trains in the course of those years that would take Jews to their final destination. And records were kept, and there's memorials. And the memorials are a description of every train that went out with its date and how many Jews. And in 1941 and the 41, 42, the trains that went out with 4-digit numbers of passengers. A year later, 43 already, it was 3-digit numbers. From 44, already down to 2-digit numbers. And so, being in Germany, evil is real. The power of words is real. That seemingly normal people can do outrageously evil acts is real. And yet there's more to the story. When you walk through Berlin, there's memorials. There are memorials in the clothing district to the people that had the clothing stores. There are Holocaust memorials near Brandenburg Gate that were designed to be almost like coffins. There are memorials not just to Jews, but to gypsies as well, to the Sinti and Roma in Berlin. But the most remarkable memorial of all for me were what are called Stolpersteins, stumbling stones. They're made from brass. In Berlin, there's over 5,000. Stolpersteins are shiny. When you walk across them, being brass, they get shinier. And written on a Stolperstein, it's a marker of a deportee. So if there was a family living in a house, 2 parents and a child, there would be 3 Stolpersteins right in front, like where the sidewalk would be in front of the house. It would have for each of the 3 their name, when they were deported, and where they were deported to. Another of our tour guides, a young man who grew up in New York, went to an Orthodox day school, has now lived in New York for 9 years, to his parents, our friends' concern, was a tour guide for us another day. He's a freelance journalist writing for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times about cultural events in Germany. He lives in Berlin for the last 9 years. So he said he was once walking to synagogue, and he didn't make it because on his way there was a placing of a Stolperstein, and it was for a family, and people from far and wide of this family had gathered to memorialize this deportation of loved ones. And the son, apparently, of the family had played the cello. And so in front of the house on this Saturday morning, they had a little cello concert to go with this moment of remembrance. And I said, I want to meet the guy, the artist who's responsible for Stolpersteins. I heard that he lived in Cologne, which was going to be our destination after Berlin. So I looked up his website, and I called the number when we were in Cologne, thinking we'd drop in. Well, he answered the phone, which of course surprised me. I do things without really believing they're going to, work out. So he picked up the phone. He told me he was not in Cologne. He was on the road. But I could look at his website, and I could see where else he was going to be. Maybe we would cross paths. And so I did. I looked again at the website, and I saw he was going to be in Heidelberg 2 days later, and we were going to be in Heidelberg. So I called him back. And I said, we're going to both be in Heidelberg. Can I take you out for a beer in Heidelberg? So he says, yes, I'm giving a lecture at the University of Heidelberg. Afterwards, I'd be happy to meet you. There are certain advantages when you say you're a rabbi from California who would like to meet you. If you're in this business of placing Stoppelsteins, both are curious on his part. So we went to the university. Now, he was speaking in German. That's a problem. But I saw a young man, and I asked him, can you translate for me? He turned out to be a law student. University of Heidelberg is the most prestigious university still in Germany. It's oldest, so I was impressed that he was going to be my translator. Even more impressive, he did the translations on an iPad so he wouldn't interfere with anybody. But what it would turn out to be, because he came to hear Gunther Demnig. Gunther Demnig is the man responsible for the Stoppelsteins. He would tell me as we were waiting for Demnig to arrive that he was part of a committee in Heidelberg of 40 people, only 2 who identified as having Jewish roots. These 40 people were a grassroots group that he had joined in order to do the research in the archives about who the Jews were that had lived in Heidelberg and what had happened to them. That morning, they, along with Gunther Demnig, had placed 34 Stoppelsteins, inviting their families, who often didn't know it, that this memorial was going to take place. Because the researchers, they had done the research, but more. They had raised the 120 euro. Not a lot, but something. 120 euro for each of the Stoppelsteins. And so Demnig arrived, and he looked like Indiana Jones. He had on a big fedora and a vest, and he began a slideshow of his life, a man in his late 60s. Someone else, a tour guide that we met in Cologne, had said that he was the son of a Nazi. She had asserted that this was his tshuva, but it would be more complex. He showed his slideshow of how in the 60s he was a public artist. He created a wheelbarrow kind of mechanism for writing words throughout Germany. Some were in protest for the Vietnam War. Later, he would travel all over Germany pushing this wheelbarrow and writing the constitution of the country. Sometimes he would use animal blood for effect. He was a dramatic presenter, and he would become a professor of art at the university and be living in Cologne. When it became the 50th anniversary of the deportation of the Roma and the Sinti, the Gypsies, and he saw that in Cologne nothing was taking place civically to mark that milestone, because they were apparently all deported from Cologne on the same week, the same day. And so he, at his own initiative, created these plaques that he put into throughout the city, memorializing the 50th anniversary. And that's what he was used to doing, writing on the ground. And he shared with me at the beer after the talk that a turning point for him was a conversation with the rabbi in Cologne, who said to him, "What you've done to memorialize the Gypsies is important. Know that to forget a name is as if the person never existed. And at the same time, to remember a name is to perpetuate that person's life and their dignity." He was very taken, he shared, by that comment. And he said, "I'm going to create memorials to the names of all the people here in Cologne who were deported during the war." The head of the Jewish community was opposed. he could not get a permit. She was opposed because she said walking on the names would be a desecration. So he went back to the rabbi, and he said, "What do you think?" He said, "It's not a gravestone. We tend to avoid walking on graves, but this is a memorial. This is good." And so the first of the Stolpersteins that were planted was in Berlin without a permit. It took 3 years later before he could do it in Cologne. And now, as I noted, there are 5,000 in Berlin alone and over 50,000 throughout Europe. He travels all over. His son and wife are involved. He has 9 people full-time helping him create the Stolpersteins. In towns all over Germany, there are these grassroots people researching their past, owning that past, shamed of their past, and knowing they can only go forward with dignity by owning up to what took place. What I never appreciated till I went was, one, the ownership of the past of this new generation. It's the last 20 years, the grandchildren who said to the grandparents, "We never talked about what you did during the war growing up. What did you do?" It's only the last 20 years with the reunification of Germany in 1990. At the same time, that sense of becoming a nation again. During a time in which in Germany you did not display a German flag, not till 2006, and the World Cup did people display nationalism in Germany. People were ashamed of that past and did not talk about it. But that changed with reunification. We had 2 German tour guides. One has a doctorate in Holocaust studies. Both of his grandparents served in the Nazi forces. It was never talked about. In fact, what he only learned as a teenager is that his father's father, and they were Germans living in Denmark, served jail time after the war for watching the ports in Denmark on behalf of the Nazis. He, like so many who rebelled against the silence, volunteered on a kibbutz in Israel after high school. And when he returned to Germany, he wanted to understand the silence and his grandparents. He now teaches Holocaust studies both in Copenhagen and leads tours for future leaders throughout Europe through an organization in New York. But even more dramatic was our second tour guide, a young woman along the Rhine. She shared that her grandmother lived during World War II and that she had 3 brothers. So her grandmother had 3 brothers who were Nazi soldiers who fought in Russia and the Ukraine. All 3 of her uncles committed suicide after the war. I said to her, "Why do you think they killed themselves?" She said, "Because they probably did awful things. That was the front in which Jews were killed in mass." She said there was also no way to process that loss. The enormous damage to the German people for what they did or for what their grandparents did endures. Again, seeing Germany through Jewish eyes is to know that you don't blame the offspring for the sins of the elders. And being in Germany, we visited the parliament, is to appreciate Angela Merkel, because countries reflect their leaders and their leaders reflect who they are. Did you know that Angela Merkel, we know she grew up in East Germany, but do you know that her parents actually took her from West Germany to communist East Germany? Because her father was a pastor, a Lutheran pastor. And it was already when it was communism and he felt a calling in order to bring religion to East Germany. And that's how she grew up in East Germany with the name Angela, a religious name, Angel Merkel. born in 1954 with a doctorate in physical chemistry. She walked with Elie Wiesel and Barack Obama in Buchenwald in 2009. And after that visiting of the horror, each spoke. Elie Wiesel would later share how moved he was by Barack Obama, saying to him, "You speak last." Wiesel said that's a breach of protocol. Usually the President of the United States or the President of Germany would have the last word. But in this case, it was the President of Germany, then the President of America, and then Elie Wiesel. And when she spoke, she said, "What we witness and memorialize here is the shame of what took place under Nazism. And it's a shame that we as Germans own. And the way we need to respond to it is by being a force for good in the world." When I was in Germany, I went looking as well for refugees, curious to see what their conditions were like. In 2 cities, I asked our guides, "Can you take me to see the refugees?" They checked with the offices and were told, "Those who arrived in Heidelberg and those who arrived in Frankfurt have already been relocated. It's been months." Angela Merkel led Europe, taking in 1 million Muslim refugees in the last 2 to 3 years. Yes, it was politically controversial. Yes, she went down in the polls. Yes, the right wing in Germany has grown in power. That's what makes it a heroic act. That's what makes it indeed an act of tshuva. When you go to Berlin, it is not the Berlin of 1933. There are people there from all over the world. The Turks who arrived in the 60s, and now these refugees coming in large numbers. The expats from America and from other countries, because there's a quality of openness in Germany today. Its weakness was so dark, so weak. And it has potential to do such extraordinary and does extraordinary things. At the end of the day, we had a good time in Germany, to my surprise. Great ice cream, great chocolate, the finest chocolate store maybe in the world in Berlin. If you love chocolate, Berlin. Ken Reinhardt, one of our congregants, took me to hear a Wagner opera conducted by Daniel Bornbaum, born in Argentina, raised in Israel. He's the premier conductor in Berlin today, a Jew. Things do not move in a straight line. And I'm reminded of our Haftorah that Jay Masterman will chant today for the 26th time. The story of Yonah. Yonah is a prophet called by God. And God says to Yonah, "Go to Nineveh and preach to the people there that they must repent." And Jonah flees. Why? Because Nineveh was the enemy of Israel. Nineveh was hated by Israel, and Israel had reason to hate them. He said, "I'm not going to go and help them repent." And God said, "Yeah, you are." And took Yonah back to Nineveh. That's the story we're going to read this afternoon. The people of Nineveh, which is today's Mosul, listened and repented. The rabbis put it into our Yom Kippur liturgy so as to say, even those who are the worst, even those who are not the Jewish people, even those who are the enemies of the Jewish people, are my people too, because I am God. I am the creator of all people. I care for them to repent. I want them to rise to their higher self. And they did. They repented. The people of Nineveh repented. It's our model for today, that even they can become us. The world does not move in a straight line. I did not want to go because I was identified with pain. I must admit, Even then, as I traveled through Germany, alongside beautiful woods, I couldn't help but reflexively wonder, where would I have hidden? It's still second nature. But the fact that it's my wound, the fact that it's our wound as a Jewish people, and rightly so, and we are a people of justice, it doesn't mean that evil is to be dismissed, but it doesn't mean that evil is to be held as a source of power against them either. We do not believe in collective guilt. My experience was capped by an experience I have longed to have. We visited together the Jewish Museum, and at the Jewish Museum, I got that bigger picture of the history of the Jews of Germany, how we had come with the Romans in around the year 800 to Germany, to Speyer, and how along that Rhine River, that major artery, it had become the Jerusalem for Jews, in which so much of the richness of our Jewish people that we think always existed emerged, allowing us to flourish despite difficulty. In Israel, I met an artist years ago named Menashe Kadishman. He's famous for his goat paintings you may have seen. Menashe Kadishman was commissioned to do a memorial in the Jewish Museum. He gave me, when I met him in Israel, little faces. I even had him put his initials in one, MK, Menashe Kadishman. I had heard that at that museum in Germany, he had created an entire room as a memorial. And I went to that room feeling that connection, having received this gift from the artist. And as it turned out, I was there by myself. And I walked across 10,000 large metal faces, all different sizes, but always with the mouth open. And as you walk across this memorial, it's a memorial designed by an Israeli artist, but not just for Jews. It's a memorial for all the victims of horror in the world. Heaven knows. I reread Elie Wiesel's remarks at Buchenwald. Angela Merkel spoke. Barack Obama spoke. And then Elie Wiesel spoke. He said, "I've returned to this place to find my father, who I never was able to bury. He comes to rest in the clouds." And he said, "I've always asked, did the world learn? Did the world learn?" And I can't say it did, because there's still children who suffer in this world. If you read his remarks, that's where it ends, open. Doesn't make it pretty. He keeps it real. And so I walked and I listened to those clanging sounds of these faces, a memorial, shalechet, a memorial of fallen leaves for those who still suffer. And soon after, other people came into the room. And I used it as an opportunity just to listen to those clanging, that sound of dissonance. I don't know how long I stood, 10, 15, maybe more, meditatively until I was in an altered state. And then I left that room, and there was a melody in my head. I've always wanted to have a melody. And it kept coming, the same melody over and over. I sat down and I turned on my iPhone, but I was singing too softly, so I started again louder, over and over this melody that for me pulled together Germany. It pulled together that the Israel Museum is to see the world of the Jews in a big canvas, more than just the Holocaust, but a life and a place in which we had thrived and continue to live. There are green shoots in the synagogue of Lewandowski the cantor whose melodies we use now in Berlin. There is a woman rabbi educated in Israel. I went to services and had an aliyah. She was born a Lutheran. And she's a leader in the German Jewish community, infusing green shoots of who we are as a people. But who we are as a people is more than our wounds. It's the calling of Yeshayahu today in our Haftarah. This is not the fast that I want, it's your compassion for my children. And walking in that memorial dedicated to victims of the world, I knew that this was not only a trip to Germany, it was a trip inward to being more fully alive. And so, with Amy's help, the Kaddish Nigun. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, we are a people with collective memory, a memory that entails deep, deep wounds, and a melody that entails moments of greatness of our people that have left our mark wherever we have been. We are called by you, the parent of all, to acknowledge teshuvah, that there is the opportunity for change. Those who caused us harm have largely passed in Germany today. Their children and their grandchildren are not to blame. It is for us the opportunity to share with them the best of our tradition, our strength, our capacity to be caregivers not just for our relationship with them, but our relationship with all of those who suffer. Amen. Last time. Thank you.
In 5 minutes or so, we will be beginning our Yizkor service. We certainly welcome everyone to stay for that, but if it is your custom to depart for Yizkor and then to come back afterwards, we just wanted to know that in about 5 minutes or so, if you could do so in an orderly fashion, and then we'll begin Yizkor shortly.